Good morning, good afternoon, Cohesion friends. Welcome to the 11:30 session, Securing Institutional Assets, Protecting Against the Ransomware Threat with Hank. And Hank, I can't pronounce your last name, but I think everyone knows you. So without further ado, Hank, please take it away.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming to this presentation. I would like to encourage interaction. I can't see any questions that come in, but this is a very sensitive matter right now with all the money that's been outflowing from institutions and commercial organizations because of the ransomware threat. I'm going to be taking you places that I normally don't take clients because this is pretty serious business that we're talking about. So let's get started. I could say a lot about David Kent Consulting, but I think the best thing I can say about where I work is I get to innovate and I get to do things that I've never been able to do at other companies before. It's a great place to work. And it's my pleasure to bring to you some of the benefits of that innovative spirit that we have at David Kent Consulting to help you, especially in something like this, because the better you can protect yourself, the better it is for all of us. So it's just a little slide joke here. My first day in the cloud, happy in the cloud, and my second day in the middle, getting rained on by data. And the third day, the boss didn't pay the cloud bill, so my data went away. And then the boss on the fourth day moved up to the cloud. Haha. So let's get started. Ransomware, what is it, and where does it come from? It's just nothing more than code, except for its intent, which is malicious and illegal. Now, I've spent a good deal of time on the dark web, and I can tell you that most of the code originates from state-sponsored or state-tolerated players. And clearly China and Russia are on the top of the list of sponsored players, but you have many states that turn a blind eye to it. I can recall when I was conversing with someone in Ukraine earlier this year, as I was posing as a buyer of or renting of malicious ransomware code, and I was looking at their toolkit, which they wanted to rent to me for 3 months for $40,000. And the young man who I was talking to, who was demoing the code and explaining it, was literally playing a video, or his camera was pointing to himself, and then behind him I could see lights and poles. I could literally see the connection there with this criminal that I was talking to and one of the many illicit activities that they use these monies from cryptocurrency transactions, where they steal our money and then use it to do other illegal and horrible things. So it angers me. The risk is very clear, and I hope that I can help you to be more aware of the threat and to empower you with a starting point for the things that you can do to combat this threat. Because I tell you, network after network after network that I've looked at, both institutional, government, and commercial, there are just so many weaknesses out there, and it's not difficult to get tight and to get more secure, but it does take a commitment to do it. It does take tenacity, and it does take some money, but surprisingly not as much money as you think it would take to make things more secure. These organizations are enterprises. They're criminal enterprises. They're aligned with drug cartels. They're aligned with sex trafficking rings. They're aligned with other highly illegal but highly organized crime families, both within the United States and outside of the United States. And many of these enterprises are interconnected. It is a worldwide problem. There are no borders. You have many programmers and developers who contribute to the code tools and the code bases that are used to conduct attacks. And a lot of this code is very sophisticated, as we'll talk about in a little while. Most of the code bases are found on something called the dark web. You've probably heard of the dark web. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And fortunately, some of the code is reproduced from the dark web and is made publicly searchable by IT security experts. And I'll give you some links to some places where you can look for that. But I caution you, probably about 40% of the dark web code actually makes it in the public space. Most of it is dark to the analysts until they discover it. And it really is a cat and mouse game. What is the dark web? The dark web is in the internet. It's part of the World Wide Web portion of the internet, but it's not indexed to internet search engines like Google or DuckDuckGo. It was born with the advent of Tor networks, the Onion project, and the Tor browser, which that should tell you, that for those of you who know anything about the Tor project, which was actually originally funded and developed in the Naval Research Laboratory as a means of securing communication within the Department of the Defense, that when that code was released in 2004, and a lot of the work that came out of higher ed research, frankly, the dark side of Tor has had unintended consequences that go well beyond just the early days of illegal music sharing. There are other networks out there other than Tor now, such as I2P and Zoronet. And if you spend any time there, it won't take you long to discover where they are. There are dark web tools that are commercially available that vendors provide that get you to parts of the dark web and give you some analysis and insight into it. Now, if you do go to the dark web, protect yourself and know what you're doing, and don't put your network either at home or your network in your organization at risk. If you're going there and if you're looking, someone else is looking and they are looking at you. So just be aware of this and be aware that these folks, they're criminals and they're doing evil stuff. I pulled this down yesterday from sophos.com. There's a pretty good survey that was conducted globally for education. It was agnostic to K through 12 versus higher ed. It was all of education, but here's some numbers. 44% of the respondents of 400 people who were surveyed, or organizations, were attacked by ransomware. 58% of those who were attacked had their data encrypted by the criminals. 35% of those who had their data encrypted paid the ransomware, but only 11% got all of their data back. In fact, only the average was only 63% of the data was returned. And the mean average of the 400 respondents for the cost for rectifying a ransomware attack was $2.73 million, with the average payout in ransomware at $112,000. And the two areas in all of the industries that have been looked at that are the most vulnerable and the most attacked are retail and education. Now, you would think retail getting their act together right now. Really? No, they're not there yet. But neither is education. Education has a long way to go. I'm going to take you through the anatomy of an attack. I've played war games before in the commercial sector and a couple of times in the education sector, where I actually hack somebody's network and then tell them what my findings are after I've completed the attack. I've also analyzed attacks, and I've also, on one occasion, been the victim of a high profile attack, which was successfully mitigated. And it was successfully mitigated because we had a plan. We had an intruder response plan, we had an intruder response handling plan. We involved the state high tech crime lab. Several other law enforcement entities got involved, and we had all the protection measures in play where it gave us, and I mean it, it gave us maybe a day or two to shut down before we were compromised. After that shutdown, which was the first 4 hours of the work, and we went down there and the executive leader said, shut it down, and we shut it down. Trap doors opened up everywhere, and our network was gone, and it took us 3 days to get everything back. So real nasty business. So I'm going to take you through the anatomy of an attack. You have a functional user somewhere out there who clicks on an email leak. And in some cases, you've got code over there where you can even hover over the link, and it could activate some malicious code that could try to compromise the machine. Although that's rare, I don't see a lot of that. I see more the click link that actually activates the malware. So the user clicks on the malware link. There's a 0-day defect on their machine, or their machine has not been patched. And for those who don't know, a 0-day defect is a defect that is not known. And if you want to get a feel for it, if you go on the dark web and you start looking for 0-day defects, you're going to find them, and you're going to find a lot of them. You're going to discover just how much the industry is not doing to secure our stuff. Again, you're hearing my passion and my anger coming through. I'm very passionate about this because I can't understand why these big developers are not investing the resources that they need to get their houses in order and to produce software that is not riddled with security defects. Well, let me go on. So the machine is compromised, and application of products, very open source products, foundational products that you and I use to develop new business applications. The intruders are using the same stuff that we're doing. They have the same agility, so that they've got a bunch of toolkits that they built up. They've got their code base, they've got their library, and now you've got a suite of modules that have installed onto this machine. Gone are the days where it's a simple rootkit and a little bit of code. You've got an application running on this machine. And this application is now going to look at its adjacent routed networks that are not filtered either with an access control list, a web application firewall, or some other type of security appliance. And it discovers very quickly that there are 4 other adjacent subnets that it can begin to engage in scanning. And it proceeds and it goes ahead and it does the scanning, and it finds a number of desktops and laptops and a mobile device. It compromises the desktops, and it compromises an old network switch. The analogy, as a matter of fact, the pipeline tobacco, and I'm forgetting the name of that company, Continental. The Continental pipeline, the ransomware attack resulted because somebody didn't turn off an old router and had a weak password. So this is the exact scenario that I'm describing. And it's not hard to do when you've got a cloud working behind you that can conduct a brute force attack with all that cloud processor power working in the intruder's favor, and then just simple messages being exchanged between the compromised machine or machines and the device that they want to target the attack on. And a common vector of attack would be to use your machines to compromise something interesting with a highly sophisticated brute force attack, where now your machines are an extension of that intruder's dark cloud, and they're using your cloud as their dark cloud to attack your network and to compromise something juicy. So in this scenario, in 4, any interesting data that has been found by the bot that is installed on this machine, and remember that's a suite of application modules that are working as a cohesive full stack application on that computer, that data is now being recorded probably to a microservice database application, because there's nothing to say the intruder couldn't stand up, say, a small instance of Docker on that machine and run a container without the user even being aware of it. It's possible to write the code to do that. So now you've got a database running on that computer that's recording interesting, juicy targets, and that data now gets shipped off to the intruders, to the rest of the intruder's dark cloud, of which your network is now a part of. The intruder goes through the database and gets an alert. I've got a Cisco switch router. I'm going to focus my attention on that device, because if I can compromise it, it's going to tell me anything I need to know about this new network that I now own. In the next phase, the intruder then runs a brute force attack. And the brute force attack typically will involve more than one computer, again, to take advantage of your processing workload capability to increase the number of machines working on the problem, to reduce the delta, the time delta from when that device was discovered and the brute force attack began to when the compromise of the device it actually takes place. Now, with the intruder having compromised the switch and having become the super user of that switch, they can now go in and say, bring down the VTP domain, and oh wow, look at all this stuff, and oh my goodness, they have given me the rights to go in and manage the VTP domain from this lowly switch. How dumb. Let me have some fun with that. So the attack goes on, and it may have been a week or two now from when the initial intrusion has occurred. And at this point, the intruder has learned a lot more about this network. And in the process of learning it, the intruder has learned that the ERP application is, well, let's just pick a name, E1, which is an Oracle ERP application. And the intruder has a good understanding of that application because E1, PeopleSoft, Banner, they're all designed around the same technology where you've got an Oracle back end, you've got a mid-tier, and that application mid-tier is typically fronted with Tomcat apps, either embedded in jar files or running as a native Tomcat application. And the weaknesses of those products and the publications of the many zero-day defects for those applications are very well known. So now the attacker begins to focus on mid-tier because, hey, this is where I'm going to hurt them the most. This is where I'm going to get the money. I can compromise a SharePoint by virtue of the fact that I've already own all these desktops and that this network is now part of my dark web. However, I would really like to compromise that ERP system because now I can steal the customer list. I can steal, if it's a retail application or an education application, I can hit the jackpot. And the jackpot is all that PII, because once I have that personal identifiable information, names, addresses, date of birth, social security number, credit cards, I mean, that list just goes on. I own it and I can sell that for a penny or 3 pennies or a quarter a name, depending on how relevant that information is and how important that information is to someone else that I could resell that to. And by the way, even though I've resold it, I can go ahead and continue to use that for my own purposes to make more money. So the brute force attack proceeds and a 0-day defect or a lax security is found. So typically, how does this work? There's an unpatched system or a 0-day defect. I bust in and I am now the service user for that instance of Tomcat. And now any file that service user has access to, I have visibility to. And most of us in this industry, we are not hashing passwords. We are putting login names and credentials in clear text password. And we are setting ourselves up for this kind of attack vector. Because once the intruder has found the file, even if it takes them 3 or 4 months, they're going to find it eventually. And when they find it, now they've got the credentials to get to the ERP database. Oh, there's a service user over here. Oh, the service name is Oracle. Well, I know what that is. So let me get over there. Now I'm the Oracle user. Let me do a .orainv. Oh, look at that. Prod DB. I love it. SQL plus /as/sysdba. I am God. I own you. I own your data. And now I extract your data to a CSV format. After I've studied the database schema, I learn where everything is. I find what I want, I pull it, then I bring it back to the compromised machine. You remember that functional staff computer? I still own that too. And I'm going to put the data there and I'm going to exfiltrate that data to somewhere else where I know it's not going to be discovered. That could be on my own computer network where I've got all of my Raspberries running. It could be on in a dark web data center that I'm actually renting space in. It could be any number of places. The fact is, I've got the data. I own it.
Hi, Hank. We have a question
Yeah,
based on this slide. It's from an anonymous attendee.
sure.
And the question is, what should we have as service user credentials to Linux boxes to help ensure that we're not part of letting the hacker in as us?
The answer to that is none. The service user should be a locked account. It should be locked in multiple ways. One, you should never create a password for the service user. Number two, you should also define that the service user has no login capability. There are a number of ways to do this. Within SSH, you want to have a deny user statement and explicitly state that the service user is in the deny login capability with SSH. You want to lock down how you're handling your SSH keying on that box, and you want to authenticate with passphrase protected SSH keys, with the private keys highly protected and highly secured, and only the public keys on the VM and the passphrases always secured in some kind of password management system.
As a follow-up to that, the question says, by never create a password, do you mean use public private key authentication? I think you may have answered that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then another question, it says, you mean that I have to log in as, quote, hello, it's me, a real human, end quote, over SSH, and then sudo up on the service user?
That's the less secure but a valid approach. A stronger approach is to have a bastion host on a cordoned off network whereby you do not have direct access to that machine. You have to authenticate to the bastion host. And I would suggest that if your single sign-on controls and guardrails are effective, that you've got correct you got correct password security complexity, and you're using multi-factor authentication to get to the Bastion host, and then from the Bastion host you can SSH to one of these machines, whether it be a Tomcat, a mid-tier app or a database app.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have for now.
Sure, let's go on then. And of course, it's not a happy ending. They want your money. Now, Dogecoin is not one of the three major cryptocurrencies, but woof, woof. I'm a dog person. I had to put Dogecoin up there, but that's how they get you. And with blockchain, crypto is completely hidden as far as who the buyer and the seller are of the coin from law enforcement. And if you want to know why Bitcoin is traded and is so popular, in my opinion, it's about greed. And the primary motivator of the greed is what's happening on the dark web with cryptocurrency and what people are doing with cryptocurrency to fund illicit, illegal, and dangerous stuff, including the drug cartels. Now, I tell you, the stuff is really deep, and I can follow some of it, but some of it just goes way over my head. You've got programmers and developers who are mathematicians who've been hired by these crime families who are writing extremely sophisticated code. And this is a reprint of code that I was actually studying and looking at. And this is a mathematical bit shift application. It's an encryption within encryption that's taking place. And you can see there are hints to that with the call to a function VBASTR copy, and then we're passing to it parameters. And then we've got some more of that string move that is going on over here further down at lines 52 and lines 54. And unless you know what the keys are, you're not going to decrypt this. And that the bad guys are using encryption to keep the good guys out. And they're also using encryption, and they're using standard internet protocols to get their payload out. In the case where I was working for a company and our network had been compromised, the only saving grace that protected us, and mind you, that protected us, was we implemented NIST 800. And NIST, if you're not familiar with NIST, Special Publication 800, we did 5.3 at this organization, which is for classified data, but you have NIST 800-171, which is typically applied to higher education, which is for controlled unclassified information. Regardless, whether you do NIST 800-53 or 171 controls, if you do the full suite, part of doing the full suite is not only you're blocking ingress traffic, but you're blocking egress traffic. And since we were NIST 800-53 and we were doing all of it, we were blocking outbound traffic, and the intruder could not get their payload out. So they wormed deeper and deeper and deeper into our network until we detected them. And they were one host adjacent to our most sensitive classified server that we did not want to have compromised. It's running AIX. It was tight as a freaking drum, but you never know. But the fact is, we blocked them before they could get their data out. But let's talk about the stealthiness that's going on in this arena. I'm going to quote: the malware authors have added capabilities to steal crypto and wallet data. Oh, you think your Oracle wallet is secure? You better think again. Swap crypto addresses present within the clipboard. Oh crap, you mean stuff that I'm using in my operating system that is doing crypto for my business applications? Oh, you can steal that too. Oh my goodness. Find and upload document files exfiltrate data through SMTP and the Telegram bot API. Telegram bot API, that's just basically an API that has been built to to communicate between nodes using the HTTP protocol. So your firewalls think it's valid. So, oh yeah, we let 80 out, we let 443 out. Go on out and have a nice day. Oh, boof, out goes your data. As well as anti-analysis VM tactics. Now I call that stealth. So we're using stealth to detect the bad guys. The bad guys are using stealth, which includes AI running in the cloud to avoid detection. This is serious stuff. Any questions before I go into strategies?
Hank, we have no questions.
Okay. Your first thing to do is to hire a chief security officer or somebody who knows what the hell they're doing with IT security. They got to go where I go. They got to know it. Otherwise, they're not worth their salt and you're just burning your cash. They have to have skin in the game and they've had to have been in the arena. They've had to have come through the fight and come out standing. So that's your first priority. Hire an expert. Now, if you can't afford an expert, whether you go with an organization like David Kent Consulting or somebody else, hire an outsider to help you. Don't do this alone. Next thing, segment your network, and not just a DMZ and an intranet DMZ and a user's intranet, a student intranet, a faculty intranet. No, that's not good enough. You've got to segment within segments as well. You've got to create as many layers so that you can make it as difficult as you can so that that intruder that either buys you the time to discover the intrusion before you're compromised, or the intruder says, these guys are too tight. I'm giving up. I've got juicy, easy targets somewhere else. I'm going to focus my efforts somewhere else. And the latter is usually what happens. Usually they just go away. And you can detect it by doing things like honeypotting, where and honeypot is where you actually build a network and you trap the intruders. You make them think that they've compromised you, and then boom, you can decide what to do with that information once you've honeypotted them. When you firewall, you want to firewall within the thinking of zero trust networking. 40net has some pretty good white papers on building zero trust networks. You should go look at those and learn about that. There are some other players that have some good white papers on that, but I think 40net has some of the best I've seen. So here I've talked about segmenting within subnetworks of associated systems and firewall between the subnetworks. Absolutely must do it. You remember the first drawing where the intruder compromised the machine and started looking at adjacent networks right away. When I build NIST networks, I build them so that every adjacent subnet cannot talk to the other adjacent subnet. There is a firewall between that is blocking the traffic, that is not authorized. Containerize your app tier. We'll talk about that. And we already talked about locking down the service users because you in IT are the primary target. A functional user gets compromised, but if a system administrator gets compromised, like what happened at Tyson Foods, man, they wreak some really expensive damage now. Going on, air-gapped backups. What does that mean? Let me give you 2 plays. One play is I have on-prem backup. I'm Tivoli Storage Manager in Data Center A and Data Center B. All my backups go to Tivoli on-prem in the primary data center, and then those backups replicate with a trusted application relationship, a one-way trusted relationship between the primary and the copy Tivoli server. Now, the copy Tivoli server has the data. However, the primary Tivoli server does not have the authority to do anything but write once to the other Tivoli server that's in another data center. That's what I mean by an air gap. It's more affordable, though, for education to use the cloud. The cloud is your friend, and you do air gap backups within the cloud. So if you've got your banner system or other sensitive like research applications, big freaking targets now. So if you got an R&D and say an NIH research funded effort going on, then you need to air gap the backups of that application. If you're running Oracle on bare metal or VM, perform the cold backup of the VM periodically so that you've got the whole Oracle home saved, and keep that for more than 31 days. Keep it for 3 months. I wouldn't go less than 3 months because these intruders can be around for a while before you know it. And if you have an Oracle home and if a backup and you have, and it goes back before the intrusion, and you couple that with a current data backup, and they haven't planted any store procedures that could mess you up into your database, then you just simply recover your data and tell them to go take a hike. If you're using ASM, export your wallet and crypto keys to a safe place that is not on the appliance, and replicate your sensitive backups to the cloud. And I already talked about that. And replicate those backups to another region. Azure and AWS are great at that. Oracle, they're not there yet. For containerization, store your code to a Git repo and then back up the repo. Do not store credentials in readable text files. That is a major no-no. And that's just putting up the flag and saying, come get me. I've given it away to you. Use Git pulls to grab your source and to pull from your in your integration to push your containers to the repository, and then you do Git. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Your source for building your container. So your source is in a Git repository, and so you might have your Docker Compose files there, or your YAML code for a Kubernetes cluster, and then pull that code down from another source. I see I'm running low on time. I've got, what, 10 minutes? 5 minutes. Okay. All right. And then make sure you're using private endpoints to your storage. Keep it really tight. Have an incident handling plan in place and a response plan. You need human capital. You need the anti-ransom technology tools. And one of the tools you definitely should have is a secure proxy for all outbound traffic. Here is an example of a network segmentation that I'm talking about, and this is light. When I do cloud, it's much heavier than this. And with containerization, here are your containers. Let's say your containers get compromised. Drop the connector, drop the containers, find out what happened, what the security risk was, fix it, push new containers out to the registry, and then go ahead and push your app out, and bam, you're up and running, assuming that your data has not been compromised. And here is an example of a cloud topology. These slides are up there, so you got to pull them down. You got to look at them. Finally, here, I put a couple things up here. So Bleep Computing, Talos Intelligence, those are two good sites to go to in NIST. But again, note my disclaimer. If you're not a security professional and you're visiting the dark web and you're in learning, then be sure to protect yourself, because you can get into trouble really quick. Do we have any remaining questions? I see I've managed to finish with 6 minutes left. Again, this is not the kind of thing I talk about all the time, so you probably won't see this opportunity again for a while. Pick my brain, please.
Do we have any questions from our attendees?
Looks like one just came in.
That is correct. The question was if this would be in the recordings, and yes, it will be.
Okay, well, Shannon, thank you for hosting. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's session, and I wish you the best of fortune in securing your networks against the ransomware threat. Thank you.
Hank, we had one question come in.
Go ahead, please.
Do you have any tips for preventing end users from falling for ransomware attacks?
Training. Lots and lots of training. There's a lot of training you can buy that's off the shelf, but you've got to reinforce that training with, especially with your technical liaisons and managers. So what I would say is teach the teacher to become the advocate for you. Target the right people to train beyond the basic training and engage in actual training exercises. More questions? 6 minutes remains.
We had a comment thanking you very much for the presentation.
My pleasure. I'm happy to help. This really is service to the community. Okay, well, we're going to end the call now. My computer, Zoom is about to crash my computer, so I will not be able to exit the meeting, but our host at Cohesion will shut it down now. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.